Good evening, everyone. Kojo's Corner is back in session, and how how interesting that the last time we spoke there was a provincial election, and now that we are back, there's a federal election. So we are talking to the one and only Chris Erl about elections here in Hamilton. So, Chris, welcome back.
I always love being here. Thank you for having me.
So, if you don't know, there is a federal election. Campaigning started. I think we're in week two, right? Are we in week two?
It feels like we're in week 400, but yeah, I think it's week two.
It's week two. You have I believe advanced polls are April 21st, and election day is April 28th. So these are crucial dates that you should mark on your calendar. If you haven't registered, you can get in touch with Elections Canada and go through that process. Even if you haven't registered, you can still vote. I'm speaking from experience. So please make sure you vote. We need more than 50% of people voting in an election. So I encourage all of you listening and checking this out later to go and vote. So yes, there is an election here in Hamilton. We have five ridings, and also one thing to notice that I believe, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. There is one riding that has changed boundaries, which I believe is Hamilton Center, right?
So, actually, a few of them have changed. You are right. Hamilton Center's boundaries have changed. The boundary now extends to Parkdale in the east. So, a couple of extra neighborhoods have been added to Hamilton Center, but Hamilton East has gained all of the Stony Creek Mountain, so everything in the Upper Mount Albion area. So that's now in Hamilton East Stony Creek. The ridings of Hamilton Mountain and Hamilton West Ancaster Dundas have extended past Brimel to the Hydro Corridor. So, not many neighborhoods included in that, but a couple folks on the South Mountain will want to check to make sure they're in the riding they think they're in. But the biggest change is the creation of a brand new riding out of pieces of Flamborough Glanbrook. They've now added Brant County. So it's now Flamborough Glanbrook Brant North, or as I call it, Flam Glam Brant North. But that one extends all the way down to Paris, Ontario. So just outside the Brantford city limits. So that's a really, really big riding out there.
Yeah, so this is why it's really important for folks to understand which riding they're in, right? And also registering, making sure that they've registered to vote and talking to your neighbors to also educate folks. Because I know I was downtown around Parkdale, and I had to let some people know that they were now in Hamilton Center as opposed to Hamilton East Stony Creek. So please make sure that you know where the boundaries are. Even on the mountain, there might people might think it's different. The federal riding is different from the provincial riding. So that's another thing that people have to pay attention to. So we not only discuss politics here, we also give you the right information so that you can make the right decision. So there you have it. So Chris, which riding do you want to start us off?
May as well start off with the big one that surrounds the city, the Flamborough Glanbrook Brant North. That one is a very interesting riding. It's the original version of it is represented by Dan Moyes of the Conservatives, so that's the Conservative seat in Hamilton. It's a very large riding, again, quite a significant rural population, but also some of the areas that are growing in Hamilton, like Benbrook and Waterdown. So the folks out there, they have quite a few really interesting candidates to choose from. Just full disclosure, I know the NDP candidate out there, Peter Warren. He's a really capable young lawyer who's very interested in helping the community. But I'll do my best to provide a sort of broad overview of everything. It is a riding that's going to lean more conservative. It's got a lot more voters out there who might align with the message that Pierre Poilievre and Dan Moyes and the Conservative Party is advancing out there. The riding is it's a very large and very rural riding, so it's going to be a challenge for folks to get out and campaign and do canvassing the normal way that those of us in urban areas are usually used to. So it's going to require a lot of meeting people in places where they're congregating and gathering out there in the different halls, the curling clubs, the church basements, the places that folks will be meeting in that riding. But generally speaking, it's going to be a very tough battle for whomever to knock the conservative candidate off of the pedestal there. Dan Moyes is very connected to a lot of groups in the city. He's got strong connections with actually one of his opponents in one of the last elections, Vito Scro, who's on the right side of the Liberal Party. Even though he lives in Ward 2 downtown here, he was the Liberal Party candidate out there and did actually a very decent job for the Liberals there. But that means that Dan Moyes is running in similar circles to folks like Bob Bertina and Jason Farr and some of the other big players in Hamilton politics. So he's probably going to have a lot of backing from some folks who are really in the establishment. So that's an interesting riding to start with.
Hmm.
Uh, should we go on to another one right away, rapid fire, or do we want
Yeah,
to pick
yeah,
that one
yeah,
apart?
yeah. Let's do that. Yeah.
All right. So I think the next riding that's going to be really interesting to watch will be Hamilton East Stony Creek. That's the riding that's currently held by Chad Collins of the Liberal Party. The So just a couple months ago, it really looked like that riding was going to switch. When the Liberals were down in the polls and the Conservatives were riding this big high across the entire country, it really looked like Ned Crook, the Conservative Party candidate out there, was probably going to take the riding. He had support from people like Bob Bertina, who used to be the Liberal MP for the area, and he was
Hmm.
getting a lot of community support. You were seeing Pierre Poilievre showing up in the riding multiple times, and his
Hmm.
big stop in Hamilton during the election has been in Stony Creek.
Hmm.
It matches with some of the thinking around the provincial election, how the Conservatives were able to keep Hamilton East Stony Creek in their camp and really chipped away at the NDP's vote there.
Hmm.
And it was the Liberals that were able to place second. So there were a lot of folks who were thinking this is going to be it for Chad Collins in Ottawa. And that's why a lot of folks are saying, especially if Justin Trudeau stayed on, Chad Collins would probably opt to not run again, pass the baton to someone else, and uh, go full steam ahead on his mayoral campaign for 2026. But now, tables have turned entirely, and this looks like it is Chad Collins' race to lose. So he is now running high in the polls because the candidate he supported in leadership, Mark Carney, has won, and the Liberals have just taken off. So now it really looks like Chad Collins is in a position to be reelected again. And it's entirely possible that maybe not a ministerial position is in his future, but maybe a parliamentary assistant position, just to make sure that Carney is able to keep him in Ottawa, because it could look pretty enticing, especially if things go south with all the tariffs and the likelihood of a recession, that people will start to sour on the Liberal government, assuming they're elected pretty soon, and then City Hall might look appealing to Mr. Collins again. So, in order to keep him there, Mr. Carney might need to incentivize Chad Collins to stay in that seat. I think the really interesting thing out there is that the NDP has not yet nominated a candidate.
Wow.
We
Okay.
are getting very close to the end of nominations. The parties are scrambling right now to start putting candidates into different seats. We've already seen the Green Party has nominated a candidate that previously ran for their nomination in Ottawa Centre to be the candidate in Hamilton East. So it shows that they're trying to distribute the resources and skills that they have. But ultimately, it means that the NDP is going to have to really work hard to find somebody to maintain a decent level of support in that riding.
Mhm.
It's something that I think, you know, if the party wants to prove its viability at the federal level, putting up a good fight in Hamilton East Stony Creek is going to be absolutely essential for them. It was a riding they held with Wayne Marston for
Yeah.
years, not
Yeah.
just during the the 2011 Orange Wave, but they held it before that. Wayne Marston
Mhm.
was a key part of the team for a long time. So if
Mhm.
they aren't able to put up a strong candidate, somebody who can really do the work in Hamilton East to at least maintain a decent level of support, that's going to signal bigger problems for the party down the
Mhm.
line.
Um, you mentioned Pierre Polyev uh, making stops in Hamilton East Stony Creek. I think didn't he have he had a rally there and there were thousands of people. So I think from their perspective they think they have a chance in that riding with Ned.
Yeah, absolutely, especially because the polling showed them doing so well just a couple months ago. The conservatives have pivoted to adopting the Donald Trump strategy of having big rallies, really flashy rallies to signal their level of support. Whether or not that's indicative of the support they're going to get in that riding,
Mm-hmm.
that remains to be seen,
Mm-hmm.
especially considering the fact that they're starting to parachute in candidates to the Hamilton area ridings. The fact that the Hamilton Mountain conservative candidate is
No,
a
no, no. We haven't got into Hamilton Mountain yet. Take
am I
your
getting too
time. Yeah.
well, hint for that, there's going to be an interesting thing about that candidate. But it does show that the conservatives, they're trying to show force, right? They're trying to show that they have momentum. So holding a rally with thousands of people in Stony Creek, those
Mhm,
thousands of people probably came from the surrounding areas, from some of the more
mhm,
conservative friendly ridings in the Niagara area, as well as some of the Halton and maybe even Peel region
mhm,
ridings where they're slightly more competitive. I think what the conservatives are trying to do is show that they have momentum. The only problem is that's contrasting with the polls that are showing their momentum has not only stalled but just completely evaporated in the face of these tariffs. So I think that they're trying to put up a good fight and save face, but at this point I think it would take a seismic shift in the polls for the Conservatives to once again be competitive in Hamilton East Stony Creek.
mhm. Okay. So where next?
May as well go to HWAD, the WAD, if you will,
Ah,
the
ah,
Hamilton
ah.
West Ancaster Dundas, a riding that is very close to my heart. Again, full disclosure, in the last election, I was the NDP candidate Roberto Enriquez's chief financial officer, and I still know Roberto quite well. He's a really talented and very charismatic guy, really laid back. Even if it's outside of a political situation, make sure you say hi to Roberto because he is one cool dude. So
Mhm.
definitely a disclosure there. But this is going to be one of the most interesting ridings in the region,
Yes. Yes.
simply because this is the riding that doesn't have an incumbent MP running
Mhm,
again. This is the Hamilton riding that is completely up in the air.
mhm,
So the Conservatives thought they had scored a major public relations coup by having Erica Alexander, the granddaughter of the famous Lincoln Alexander, as their candidate. It's the Conservative Party of today is a far cry from the Conservative Party that Lincoln Alexander was an MP with. He was a true progressive conservative in that respect, and this Conservative Party is quite different. But just having somebody who has that name and that reputation in the community, that was a big win for the Conservatives. And it certainly seemed that if they put somebody like Eric Alexander, a young, dynamic, and interesting candidate, up against Philomena Tassi, who was so closely aligned with the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau, they could have scored a victory. But now the whole calculus has changed again, right? And
mhm,
so the Liberals had quite a few candidates who were ready to go and run for the nomination. There were a lot of really capable folks. One of Chad Collins's constituency assistants, a community volunteer up there, and Victoria Galea, who was the Green Party candidate in HWAD for a long time. And she started working for the Liberals shortly after the 2021 election. So it was assumed by a lot of folks in the community that Victoria was the heir apparent, that she was the person who was going to run. She's a young person. She's very, again, a charismatic individual, somebody who knows policy and is quite skilled at navigating the corridors of power. Very good with a lot of the things that you want an MP to be good with.
Mhm.
But then the Liberals decided, after Ward 8 Councillor John Paul Danko uh, put in the inquiries and put out the feelers, they decided that he was going to be a more appropriate candidate for them. So they decided to abandon the nomination process and acclaim JP Danko to be their candidate.
Mhm.
So, as we all know, JP is a controversial figure in the community, somebody whose approach to politics is very unique. He's got a very distinct way of approaching politics. And so he's going to be a formidable opponent, if only for the fact that he has shown a willingness to do what it takes to earn the votes. So he's well known. So I think that's probably a big get for the Liberals.
So, and this we might have to spend some time on HY a little bit because just like you, I know Roberto. Um, I know Councillor John Dango. I know Erica. We used to serve on a board together.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so I think, and I do lots of work on the mountain. HWAD is like cross mountain ish, if you want to put it that way. So this is very intriguing for me because I think, and I'd like to hear from you, like, Philomena Tashi, former chaplain, ran, she was well known, won a couple of times, decides to retire. As you said, Victoria, and I also know Victoria too. Full disclosure, if we're doing disclosures, supported my municipal run. And so to me, I find it interesting. And I think this is something that we also have to talk about post election is that if you had two or three people put their name forward in our nomination, right? And I'm not saying that Councillor Danko should not run or shouldn't have been picked, I'm really thinking, how is it that a nomination process did not play out, right? Because
mhm,
I think it's also like a disservice and a chilling effect for people who have been working towards something to say, hey, in 5 years I think I'm going to run for office, and then
mhm,
all of a sudden somebody that's already in office right,
yeah.
just is able to subverge the situation. And I get it. This happens all the time. Every political party always is looking for somebody that has name recognition. All the
Yeah.
people we've mentioned, they all have some version of whatever name recognition means, right? But I think this is also a problem with our democracy where we're seeing that nominations from each political party are not being done in a democratic way and in a transparent way. So then how then can you go out then and say, oh, this is a person that we should vote for because they are going to solve all the huge crises that we are facing? So where do you sit on that? I know I gave a long preamble there, but like, you've been involved in writing associations, you've written about politics. Like, how do you see that playing out in the that's contributing to the anti-democratic things we are seeing here?
Yeah, that is always a struggle, right? The complex dynamic between the central party organization that has an overall goal and local activists who may want to get involved and put their name forward. It's not easy, as you well know. It is not an easy thing to put yourself out there in the community, to offer to serve your community in such an important way. My cat Eric thinks so too. He's getting involved in this. Um, but yeah, it's very much so a very complicated thing. And we as Canadians, we are so influenced by the United States. Even though our system is more closely aligned with the British system, we are influenced by the US, and so we see their primary elections, and soon we can have something like that here as well. But you would be extremely incorrect in assuming that Canadian political parties want any sort of formal uh, process playing out like that. It's very rare that you will see a nomination battle actually happen, and especially if a person is an incumbent MP. And
Mhm,
so a lot of political parties structure their nomination processes in such a way that actually prevents anyone in the party from challenging an incumbent MP. So you could have an incumbent MP that is extremely problematic, that may not be the best representative for the party, and yet still they will be guaranteed the option to run for that party again in a federal or election or by-election, and
mhm,
same thing at the provincial level. They will be
mhm,
allowed to run without any opposition, which
mhm,
isn't necessarily fair to folks who are waiting around thinking, maybe this is my time. Maybe we can do something different. Maybe this riding can switch, and we can bring young talent in, or talent that may have a different perspective, or may be able
mhm,
to approach things in a different way. Political parties are very rarely interested in allowing that kind of democratic process to actually play out, in large part because you never know who's going to become your candidate. And political parties are always worried that somebody with a troubling background, or somebody who might deviate from the party's official line, might get nominated, and suddenly it becomes the story. We saw this exact thing happen with the Liberal Party in Markham Unionville, when their candidate got caught saying some pretty
mhm,
upsetting things about a potential conservative opponent who ended up running in a different riding. And it
mhm,
became the news story for about 72 hours until he decided to resign. Political parties are always worried about the kind of messaging that they're sending out. So if you have some person who, they're a deeply engaged community activist, they would normally fit the bill for the party, but they have one or two things that they say that might be a little bit controversial, or might change how a political party is viewed by the community. A party doesn't want that. They want to keep a tight control on it. I think it would be better if we had a system where folks could challenge MPs, where it was a little bit more democratic, and it'd be nice to see political parties moving toward that. But I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon.
and yeah, this is interesting because I also think like and this is just me speaking from my experience is that like there's this sort of like duality happening, right? Like Canadians are not, and I'm not saying this as a general statement. I'm just saying it from my point of view is that most of the time people don't want to talk about politics. But then so what happens is when it's time to talk about politics, the information or the knowledge is not there,
Yeah,
right? So you have somebody saying, oh, the best choice for the liberals is John Paul Danko at HY because he's done A and B and C and he's a counselor. That's
yeah,
the only thing that people are thinking about, which is fine. I don't have anything to say about that. But then when you dig into the minutia of things and see the track record, right? You have to ask yourself, is this the type of person that we want to send to Ottawa to represent us on all the huge issues, right?
yeah,
So to me, I think that's a question that I'm asking even my neighbors, is that we don't want to engage in the day to day of the politics, but then when it's time for an election, you have you know people that jump in and we don't know where they are, what they do, where they are from, what's their understanding of tariffs is, what their understanding of encampments is, what their understanding of all the things we talk about. And then
hmm,
those that are vocal, right, who are trying to say, hey, I am vocal because if we don't do this, there are people that are going to struggle, and then you have people that just keep quiet. They will not say anything at all on a thing, or they keep quiet when it's time for an election. They stop tweeting when during a campaign, and then everybody is saying that that person is the right person. And
Yeah.
if we say that we are we are the ones that are jealous, or we don't want them, and I'm saying, if even with the idea that Marcani is going to save us, right?
Hmm.
I, again, people can vote where they want to vote, but tell me, in the last 10 years, other than the Bank of Canada, other than that, what other thing have we heard McCartney opine about, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes very difficult to then say this is a person that's going to do X and Z and Y when they've only done one. And when I say one thing, I just mean in the context of the economy or financial stuff or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So it's something I'm really thinking about, especially in Canadian politics, because it's in American politics, the folks that go for primaries, you would know everything about them.
Yeah.
Even if it's controversial, and again in inverted commas, right? You would know that this is what they've done. But here, everybody's quiet, and then there's a nomination process that you got young people wanting to take part, and they're like, no, we'll go with the person that has name recognition. So anyways, what's your prediction? You always look at votes from past years. What's your prediction?
My prediction in HWAD is it is still a very fluid race. I think there are a lot of different options and a lot of different things that could happen. But it certainly seems as though, depending on how much information Philomena Tassi's camp will give to John Paul Danko, it certainly looks, and especially with the polls, that he's likely going to be the next MP for that riding. And this isn't to count out Roberto. I think that was one of the things folks did in 2021. They really counted out Roberto, and yet he did very well in Westdale, very well in Ainsley Wood, very well
Hmm.
on the West Mountain, in the parts of the city where you would expect a New Democrat to do very well. We I remember being an inside scrutineer for him, some of the campaign representatives that watch the vote to make sure everything goes off without a hitch, and there were lines out the door at the Westdale Public Library of students, folks
Hmm.
who were keen to cast their ballots, and he won those polls by a significant margin.
Hmm.
So it's, you can't count him out. You also can't count out the strength of the conservative machine. The
Hmm.
conservatives have money beyond anyone's comprehension. That's why they were running advertisements well before an election was even called, right?
Hmm.
They were running advertisements on Mark Carney when the liberal leadership was still happening.
Hmm.
They got a lot of money, and they can divert resources to ridings that they think they're competitive in. That's part of the
Hmm.
reason they held that big rally in Hamilton East Stony Creek. And
Hmm.
if you start to see, if Pierre comes back to town and shows up in HWAD, that's a good indication that they're putting money and resources into that riding. But I
Hmm.
certainly think that right now the strength of the liberal campaign is such that it's entirely possible some folks, they may know JP, they may not agree with the way that he does politics, but because of their fear of tariffs, their fear of the recession, and the overall fear of the threat coming from the United States, they may hold their noses and vote liberal this time, just to ensure that there's another seat in the liberal camp.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, well, like they say, and we all know that feeling. The only poll that counts is on April 28th.
Yeah.
Okay, which riding are you taking us next to?
Let's go up to the mountain, Hamilton Mountain,
Ay,
just
ay,
over to the
ay,
side,
the
riding.
mountain.
Yeah, I think you know something about that place, right? That's
Yeah, I think I know a lot about the mountain.
yeah. So Hamilton Mountain, that's, this is a very interesting race because Lisa Hefner, the Liberal MP, the incumbent Liberal MP, who's made a very clear comment about not wanting to live in Hamilton. She still maintains her residence in Oakville. She still commutes into the riding to do her work, and then commutes to Ottawa to represent the mountain there. Been very clear about that. But again, because she's a Liberal now on the current Liberal team, it's looking pretty good for her. Again, just a couple months ago, it sure seemed like Monique Taylor was uh, cruising to win. This is going to be Monique's race to win. She has a long record on Hamilton Mountain. Folks know her quite well, and she's got a lot of connections with Scott Duvall, the former MP. She was, when he worked at City Hall, one of his assistants, and so she knows what she's up against in this race. It's a riding she knows very, very well. And so, I was just up there today, and every major thoroughfare is just plastered with Monique Taylor signs. She's got a lot of folks from the days that she's built reputations up. She's got a lot of folks supporting her up there, but it's going to be very difficult because as you get further along in the riding, when you go deeper and deeper south, you're going to start to see a bit more of a very interesting dynamic. And as I alluded to, the conservative race, very similar issue that to what happened with the Liberals in HWAD. There were two very dedicated party activists ready to contest that nomination, and then the Central Party swooped in and dropped the former mayor of Haldimand County, Ken Hewitt, into the seat. He is already a controversial figure because he was the progressive conservative candidate in 2022 down there. And he lost that election to Bobby Ann Brady, the independent, because she was under the assumption that she would be the conservative candidate. But again, they played their little games and they put a different candidate in. So she showed them that she wasn't going to take that. She had conservative cred, and it's a very conservative riding down Holland and Norfolk. So she was able to win that and have one independent seat in the provincial legislature. But for Ken Hewitt to assume he can come into Hamilton Mountain and have an easy go of it, I think that's a bit of a stretch. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, but I think I think that, like, the reality too is that, like, people are tired of the Liberal government. You know, yes, the tariffs have changed the discussion, but I think in the next 3 weeks, that's what probably people are thinking about.
Mhm.
One, I'm tired of this government. Whether they've changed Carney. It looks like some people are like, okay, that makes sense. But then there's the reality too that they have to say, hey, do we really want to stick with the Liberal government, or do we want change? And I can tell you that, yeah, people are tired with the Liberal government, and we kind of saw that permeate in the provincial election a little bit. We were unfortunate there, but I think that's going to be the key question on the mountain, right? Is
Mhm.
that those that are like, don't like the Liberal government, are they going to say we'll stick with them, or we'll go with the NDP, or we'll go with the Conservatives? So I think that's going to be like the key battle, or ballot question for people that voted, or that were saying they were going to be blue south of the link. That's the area. So I am eagerly watching and talking to people, and see where they're at. So we'll
Mhm.
we'll see how it all shakes down.
Yeah, I think it's going to be again a very interesting race up there on the mountain. I think that is, Monique's got a lot of ground game. She can do a lot of work there. The Conservatives, a lot of people south of the link are going to be thinking maybe it's time to switch things up. Maybe we can, to move our vote this time. I think a lot of folks, they see Mark Carney as sort of an adult in the room. I've been talking to a lot of people, including folks who are a little bit more skeptical of everything that the government does. Some older folks, in my family and around them, and even they're saying somebody like Mark Carney is appealing to them because he seems to a lot of folks of a certain generation, particularly, a little bit more like an old school progressive conservative. A
Mm-hmm.
little bit more of a Robert Stanfield type figure, or even a kind of a Paul Martin like figure from the old days of the right wing of the Liberal Party. So some people are kind of looking at that and saying, well, I didn't like Justin Trudeau because of XYZ, but this guy's a little different. Whether or not enough people are going to change their minds, that's the big question. But I think the real thing on Hamilton Mountain is, don't count out Ralph Gerstenberger and the Marxist-Leninist Party. So
Yeah,
it's
I mean, no, yeah, you raise a good point. Like I think, this is one thing that I also learned from the provincial election is that people are also dissatisfied with how the government is working, right?
yeah,
So it doesn't matter. Forget whether you're NDP, conservative, liberal. Like not right now, people. There's never been a time where people are thinking about their government, right?
mm,
Taxes, encampments, paychecks,
yeah,
immigration. Just mention it. They are actually making that connection.
yeah,
Whether they are making the right connection, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But everybody is animated because in the past it just used to be that, oh, I'm good, we just got to vote someone that is going to, it's like a caretaker of
yeah,
the entire system. And now people are not thinking in that mode anymore. So
yeah,
um yeah, but we'll see.
yeah.
Where are we headed next to?
The last one, it's Hamilton Center, the big riding downtown. So Hamilton Center is the NDP riding right now. It is what was previously considered an NDP stronghold for the longest time, held by David Christopherson, an extremely well respected figure in the community, somebody who had years and years of experience and built really strong, lasting, and meaningful connections with organized labor, with people in the social service sector, with everyone across the city. He was the kind of guy that could win, in Kirkendall, he could win in the North End, he could win in Crown Point. He was winning all over the place. And I think a very similar case we see in Matthew Green, somebody who is able to build some pretty strong connections. He's got a very different style. A lot of folks think that Matthew's approach to politics is quite different. Some people love that. Some people are a little bit more hesitant about it. But I think people respect the way that he approaches the job. I think there might be a few hurt feelings in the community by his backing of Sarah Jammeh over Robin Lennox in the provincial election. So we'll see if that translates to anything at all. But the big issue here is that a lot of these polling aggregator sites, they're saying things like Hamilton Center is now competitive, which is based solely on national level polls. Because you look at the actual reality on the ground, the Conservatives and Liberals have flown in candidates. And a lot of folks were saying, there's even been some chatter online, why is the Liberal candidate, why is it this person? He's an individual who proudly stated on his social media up until a little while ago, may still, that he's living in Toronto, that his main party activities have been in Peel region,
Yeah.
yeah, Mississauga, Brampton, a little bit in Markham, and barely any connection to the Hamilton area,
Mhm.
but was apparently selected in his own words because of his knowledge of Hamilton. So, as Hamiltonians, we have usually a pretty strong aversion to folks who live outside the city and run in the city. Again, Lisa
Man,
Hefner being
man, even when people live in different parts of the city and they run in the same city, people are like asking what and then now you're bringing someone from
I know it's you could live on the border of one riding and yeah, be seen as yeah, it's that's the thing. I live in a part of Hamilton Center where I can see Hamilton West, I can see Hamilton Mountain,
yeah,
I can look across and see Burlington, and
yeah,
we're so connected, yet everyone just assumes that it's, especially during municipal elections. I'm not sure if you
yeah,
noticed, but people
yeah, yeah,
people have a very strong aversion to voting for somebody who might live a couple blocks down because they're technically
mm,
in a different ward or riding.
yeah,
So that's something that's really interesting. But yeah, this Liberal candidate, and again, because I think a lot of folks in the community were thinking there's some really strong local liberals or people who were unaffiliated who might have been convinced to run for the liberals, that could have served as a good candidate. Look at the kind of candidates that the liberals are picking up across the country. They have Gregor Robertson, the former mayor of Vancouver, who was an NDP member of their provincial parliament. He's now running for the liberals. You have Evan Solomon, the political reporter, who's running for the
Yeah.
liberals in Toronto Centre. Like, they're getting high profile candidates, mayors of small towns in Alberta, the mayor of Yellowknife, one of the survivors of the École Polytechnique massacre in 1989. Like, they've got a lot of people who are very high profile figures in this country and in their communities. But in Hamilton Center, it seems like they kind of just decided that they were going to go with the path of least resistance. Again, this isn't to speak negatively about the candidates' experience or their motivations, because a lot of people run for a lot of different reasons. But I can say that I think a lot of folks in Hamilton may have reservations about casting a ballot for somebody who isn't as connected to the community as somebody like Matthew Green.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
you're already seeing, the Green Party doesn't have a candidate in Hamilton Center. There are candidates who are kind of just either being put into the riding from elsewhere, or there are parties that are having a difficult time stocking up candidates in Hamilton Center, which I think speaks to what people assume Matthew Green's strength is going to be. His strength is knocking on doors. His strength is finding his supporters. His strength is getting out there in the community and being a recognizable force. So I certainly think that of all the ridings in the city, Hamilton Center is the safest for the New Democrats. And I think it could be the case that Matthew Green is one of the last New Democrats in Parliament, which puts him in a very good position to either be the interim leader or run for the leadership himself.
Hmm. Well, that discussion will happen after April 28th.
That it will, yes.
You gotta get there before. So this brings me to another question. So, and I'll make sure I don't have a long preamble. So, does this mean that political parties are not paying attention to growing their base? If everybody, like we've all been saying that, and this happened in the provincial election as well. Everybody knew there was a snap election. The election is called, and people don't. Political parties don't even have candidates. So does it mean that political parties are not even serious about growing their base?
Absolutely. It shows that, especially in Hamilton, and I'm sure this is the case around the country, but especially in Hamilton, our political parties have not been quick enough to adapt to the new political reality. The political parties of today are not doing the work necessary to build foundations and ensure that there are activists, party supporters, people willing to do policy, people willing to step up and do the miserable job of being a chief financial officer.
Hmm.
They don't have enough folks who are waiting in the wings to do that. And it shows that there's a centralization of party efforts. So everything is being taken from the grassroots and being sucked up into the offices in Ottawa and in
Hmm.
Toronto. And so rather than political parties investing in what's happening at the local level, they are thinking too broadly about absolutely everything that's happening around the country and not choosing their battles wisely. It's
Hmm.
why you saw in the provincial election, you saw in many cases there were Greens and New Democrats and some minor party folks who would sometimes be saying the exact same things in debates, in candidate statements, and yet they're fighting on essentially for the same folks, for the same voters. It's partly ego from party leaders and the people who are in the higher echelons of the party, and partially a disconnect from what everyday voters are thinking. The number of times I heard from people that they wanted to see cooperation between the New Democrats and the Greens and even the Liberals, some folks said that during the provincial election. But there wasn't any effort by the parties to talk about it until after the election, when Catherine Fife, one of the MPPs who was reelected, said she was going to start to talk to the Liberals about this. I think political parties aren't recognizing how quickly the world is changing. and they're not putting energy into supporting young talent, new talent, and doing things that would grow their base. It's really upsetting.
So let's transition then into more of the meat and potatoes, and we'll try and connect it to the federal. So let's take the provincial for example. People say the NDP and Liberals and Greens should cooperate, or in some cases work together. But I would argue that the political values of all those three parties are different,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, and I'm just gonna try and center myself a little bit, not in an egotistic way, but like just saying that, like uh let's take housing for
Yeah.
example, right? uh yes, everybody is saying build housing, but when you have one group of people uh that see housing as as a financial commodity, and another group of people that see housing as a right for all, right? If you put those two in a room, they are still going to differ on how do we build that housing, right? So to me, I am not particularly enthralled about parties getting together, but I think each party should also be very explicit about their political values, right?
Hmm.
Because what's happening too is that, you have somebody like John Paul Danko, and again, I'm just using it as an example. Somebody who say this is a progressive guy, right? He's pushed for setting housing developments in his ward and blah blah
Hmm.
blah, all of that stuff. But then when it comes to the meat and potatoes of certain issues, he's definitely not progressive, right? So how do you then differentiate all of that? And then now you find out that somebody's a liberal or somebody's an NDP. And even I would argue, again, even with the NDP, right?
Hmm.
Let's be real. There are some that have said, on an issue of X, we want to do this, and then in an issue of Y, we want to do this. So we don't spend time talking about these things, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to an election, then yes, you're going to see two people who are saying almost the same thing but are fighting, and now the question becomes which one is the worst of the worst and which one is almost good.
You're
Right.
completely right. Yeah, you're totally right in that. I think each individual, especially when they're big personalities, they can seem, their values might be very different than what you'd expect from that political party. It's a big issue in Hamilton with the Liberals. That's why I always say, a Hamilton liberal's worst enemy is another Hamilton liberal, then it's some other liberal from another part of the country, then it's the conservatives and the Democrats, because
so
they tend to fight.
so let me ask you a question, like
Yeah.
what is a Hamilton liberal, right? Because I've heard some people say they are, and I probably get this wrong, they are blue blue what blue
Blue,
red.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
blue, red,
yeah,
blue liberals,
like,
blue Grits, yeah.
yeah. So to me, I just want to know, what does that mean? And when
Yeah.
when are you blue and when are you red?
Yeah, this goes back a long time. This goes back to, the 80s and 90s, when there were schisms within the party and the party was sort of battling back and forth. It was essentially a Hamilton East and Hamilton West situation, where the Hamilton East branch of the party would often take on certain characteristics that was different than the Hamilton West branch. So you'd often see one of the groups being more fiscally conservative. They would approach things from a more neoliberal kind of way. They'd support the policies of Jean Chrétien, of Paul Martin, and be a little bit more on that side of things, as well as toning down some of the social elements. So they wouldn't necessarily center any efforts of reconciliation. They wouldn't be centering, same-sex marriage when that was still an issue. They wouldn't be talking about abortion rights and the right of, women's health care. And in many cases, some of those blue liberals, they would be explicitly anti-abortion, and they would get elected as anti-choice candidates, but just sort of blend into the background, not really talk about it. And then there's another branch of the Liberal Party that's a little bit more in the the sort of center left side of things, a little bit more focused on redistribution, a little bit more focused on social rights, kind of a New Deal style liberal, where they'd be a bit more on the Pierre Trudeau side of things, very focused on how the state can ensure equality and ensure that the market remains the way that we decide things, and that Canada remains a liberal democratic country, but doing so through alleviating social issues through redistribution. Uh, John Paul Danko does not fit into any of those categories. He is his own political actor, a very difficult person to get a handle on. When I was speaking with folks from The Spectator about Bob Bertina's campaign for mayor in 2022. I called him a syncretic populist. It's a term from political science, giving everyone a little poli-sci lesson for free. But the syncretic means you're just sort of picking policies and pieces of all these different platforms and ideologies and ideas and squishing them together to create your own brand. But the main thing that drives you is your populism, your dedication to the people or an idea of the people, and a rejection of, experts or activists or radicals or anything that JP usually rails against. And a lot of times you'll see populists within the Liberal Party doing that. There are a lot of Hamilton-based liberals who are populists. It's a Vito Scro approach. It's a Jason Farr approach. It's a Larry Deanne approach. A lot of the big names that we have known for a very long time, those are the kind of politicians that adopt this populist approach. Very different than a Philomena Tassi, very different than Margaret Bennett or any of the folks that ran Hamilton Center, folks that are dedicated to the liberal idea of progressivism, of slight redistribution, but of maintaining property rights and the rights of individuals. Their kind of liberalism is very different, and it runs up against the old boys club kind of liberalism of the Hamilton East machine.
So you see, and maybe we should have another show on this. So then, to me, I would ask the question: what has this type of liberalism done for Hamilton? Right? Like at the end of the day, I don't care. Maybe I shouldn't say I don't care. I don't. I'm not into the labels per se, but sometimes we get caught up in these labels, and at the end of the day it doesn't change anything for the city. Right now people say, oh, Matthew Green, look at the state of Hamilton. The man is in opposition, third party status. He has no decision on government policy,
Yeah,
right? How many times have people said, go and talk to Skelly and Neil Lumsden? They blame it on the NDP MPPs. So to me, I'm like, we have to start getting out of this labeling and just ask the question, what have these people done for Hamilton?
hmm yeah,
Because it's getting ridiculous, and it kind of sounds like we're doing uh, high school popularism.
yeah,
These are the cool guys with the jackets. Those those are the radical people who attend class and are always saying stuff, and then you know what I mean. Meanwhile, to like go down Aberdeen, the street is bumpy, like
yeah.
parks. People don't have housing. People don't know where their paycheck is coming from, right? Like there are all these big things, and we're out here saying, radical leftists have lost the city. Wait, we
Yeah.
don't even have any.
That is the frustrating thing for you and I, right? To hear this and to realize just how divorced from reality it is. It is so baffling, especially when you hear the usual right wing trolls on Twitter and on they tried Blue Sky, but it's not really working for them over there. This is some of the stuff that I've been writing about a little bit recently. There are folks with a very specific vested interest. They either want to advance their political careers or they want to make money, right? And they keep saying the same things. They've blamed everything in the city on Matthew Green, on Cameron Crutch, on Narendra Anand, on Maria Felix Miller, on you, sometimes on me if they ever
Yeah,
remember I
and
exist, right?
the, the one that baffles me is when they include me in the thing. I'm like, yo, I get up every day in the morning, I go to work. That's it. I come home, I do some stuff in the community just like anyone else, and then somebody tags me. I'm the reason why there's Tiffany and Barton. Yo, I had nothing to do. Like,
And the wild thing is, they're being backed by city politicians who were in office for like 12, 18, 25 years, who could have done things but chose to not do things. And I think that gets to the root of your question. What have these folks done for Hamilton? People like Matthew Green have gone to Ottawa every day to speak up for the people of Hamilton Center without being in government.
get out.
And this is important because that's the essence of a democracy. It doesn't matter if it's a minority, if it doesn't matter if it's a majority, it doesn't matter what kind of government you got. It doesn't matter if it's technically nonpartisan city hall, where the right wingers still outnumber the progressives and get to advance their own agenda all the time. A couple moderates will side with the progressives every once in a while to pass a couple things, but everyone assumes that because there are a whole bunch of, as I always say, the ladies and the gays on council, that's who they blame for everything every problem that has been coming down the pipeline for decades. You hear folks like we hear folks at City Hall say, look, we have an infrastructure deficit that we've had for decades. You hear people at Queen's Park say, we have been underfunding hospitals and mental health care for decades. You hear people in Ottawa saying, when did we stop building social housing? In the 90s. These are things that have been coming down the pipeline. And now the people in power are grown-ups. You've got Matthew Green, you've got Cameron, you've got Narendra, you've got incredible folks who are doing the work necessary to clean up the messes from the past, and the old politicians from a couple decades ago are sitting around their social clubs and smoking rooms and saying, well, now nobody's talking to me, so I'm mad, so I'm going to make it seem like it's their fault. When in reality, it's these politicians from the governing parties who have done nothing but get elected again and again and again, who have built the conditions to put us in the situation we're in. You can't blame people like Matthew. You can't blame people like Sandy Shaw. You can't blame people like you for all of these problems, because that's just a convenient excuse for folks to not do the work to educate themselves on how government works, on what needs to be done, and what a good representative will do for the community. It is petty, nonsense, silly little politics. And unless we start to challenge it with a positive, optimistic vision for the future, that kind of angry populism is going to win, and things are going to get worse for everyday people every single day.
Mm. So let's finish with this. I'll ask you this question, and I'm gonna set it up. So I've been hearing, and this has happened here in Hamilton. I've been hearing that people a lot since Mark Carney became the prime minister slash leader of the Liberal Party. People are like, well, we just gotta vote for him to prevent a Pierre Poilievre win. And I asked the question. So if that's your motivation, would you vote for somebody like the liberal candidate in Hamilton in Hamilton Center, who you have no connection to? At least Matthew Green. You
Yeah,
know what he stands for. You know he lives in the city. You can go and find him in his office. And I
yeah,
think this is happening in a bunch of other places. And let's take H Ward for example, right? So you vote for the liberal candidate there and not think about maybe we should vote for the person that is right for your own city, your
yeah.
own city. So how do you see this happening? And is it I know this is a two-part question. Is it time for us to maybe rethink how we decide who the prime minister is? Maybe on a ballot it should be like, here you vote for your prime minister and here you vote for your member of parliament. Because if everybody has to do these gymnastics, I guarantee you we are always going to vote for the liberals 10 years, then complain and create car stickers, with e- blank
Expletives and
UCF,
yes, yeah,
yes, and then we'll be like, okay, conservative, it's your time now. Then 10 years, then the same thing. Like,
yeah.
at some point we have to either change the system, or we got to be real with what we are actually doing. Where do you stand on it?
So it's a two-part thing, and I'm glad you brought both parts up. So the first part is, the reason folks are saying, we got to prevent Pierre Polyev, and some folks say we got to do what we can to prevent the Americans from invading. It's because our media has become so nationalized. Again, same thing with the political parties. You're taking power away from the grassroots and moving it to the central party. With media, everything's being centralized, and rather than having local, independent, unique reporting that's telling us the issues that matter to Hamiltonians. We're getting
Mhm.
all of our news from, from outside the city. The spec reporters, I have a lot of respect for them. They are doing a good work with what they've got. They've taken away their offices. They've downsized the size of the paper, like the physical size of the papers actually changed.
Mhm.
And most of the news that comes from elsewhere in the country, it's all from the Toronto Star Wire. So we're not getting enough local news. So we need to strengthen local news. We need to strengthen our connections with one another. And we need to keep doing things like this, having conversations about the community with people from the community to people in the community, right? This is what's important to actually help us start deciding the local issues that matter. But on the second point, this is kind of where I was getting at with the sometimes the parties might need to work together. I'm not saying forever because there are
Mhm.
fundamental differences,
Mhm.
especially between the Liberals and New Democrats, especially at the provincial level where the Liberals are a center right party and the New Democrats are a social democratic party. But collaborating once, just one time, so we can finally change our electoral system.
Mhm.
That's what we need to do. We need to move to an electoral system. I'd be satisfied with mixed member. It's whatever, but I prefer a more proportional system. You look at countries around the world, Netherlands, Denmark, Germany. You look at countries across South America, across Asia. You are seeing countries with more diverse opinions because their electoral system promotes that. Their electoral system is something that allows smaller parties to get elected. In places like Denmark, you have three or four left wing parties and then a larger center left party. So when it gets the most seats, all the other parties start to influence its policy because they're part of the government, right? We
Mhm.
need electoral reform, and none of this citizens' assembly referendum saying, do you, don't you? A coalition needs to be formed between willing political parties to say, if we win, we will change it, and we are
Mhm.
going to get it done before the next election. That was
Mhm.
Justin Trudeau's biggest failing.
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
biggest failing was not necessarily tricking people into voting for him, but I know a lot of center left
Yeah.
folks in 2015 who were so excited by the idea of electoral reform, they for the first time in their lives voted liberal,
Mhm.
and now
Mhm.
they say they'll never do it again. Except now we're in this once in a lifetime situation where they're thinking
Where
about it
yeah.
again. But I think we need to. Electoral reform is the thing that will fix our democracy, or at least ensure that it survives long enough for us to create the solutions to fix it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you as always. This is always like I say, we need to have these discussions, and even here at Kojo's Corner, we're thinking of hosting like a federal town hall up on the mountain. Because I also think, having spoken to people in February, like there's some people that don't even know the difference between federal, provincial, and municipal, right? And I'm not saying it's bad or whatever, but I just think, we don't teach it in school.
Yeah.
People that are elected benefit from this structure, so they won't change the structure. So eventually we have to let people know what it is that is happening. I was on Upper Wentworth, and I knock on some guy's door. The first thing he said, because he saw the NDP thing, he's like, "You guys, you never listen. I want you to change that speed bump over there and that speed limit sign there." And I'm like, that's you need to call Esther Pauls for that.
Yeah, good luck
You
with that.
know,
That's
yeah. And then that shifted the whole conversation. They were
yeah.
like, "What? You mean it's not the provincial government?" And then I got to spend, a little time, just because, what can I say? I spent time trying to explain to them that there's a difference. and this is who's responsible for what. This is who is responsible for what. So I think that's the thing that we have to do. So, anyways, we're doing our little part. You write a subscription thing that everybody can read. That's your part. We do this podcast when we have time. We'll try and schedule that federal elections town hall up on the mountain pretty soon. We're just trying to find a date, and we'll probably try and do it before the advance poll so that people have the necessary information that they need to vote wisely and informatively. So we'll do our bit. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And if you don't know about Chris's subscription, it's called the Incline. There was a name change because we got to change names, language, and all of that.
Mhm.
So anyways, it's called the Incline. I again, I love it because I can spend time reading it on a Saturday or whatnot, and you do a great job of also uh, adding the historical piece to it, so people can go back and say, "Oh, okay, this was from this year, this was from that year." So I really enjoy it. So, folks, if you haven't, you can check it out. Just Google the Incline Chris Erl, and it will show up, and you can subscribe, you can
Yeah.
support. These are the things that we are trying to do because we know ain't no Marcani gonna give us that information.
Yeah, if folks are interested, the incline.email. That's where you can do it. And if you really enjoyed my conversation today with Coach about the ridings, the next edition is going to be on the history of the ridings in Hamilton. So a little bit of a background on that.
When is it coming out?
It should be out next Thursday. I'm going to get back onto my usual Thursday posting schedule. There have been a couple hiccups with some things, as I noted. The internet doesn't like me sometimes, and I mean, like, just the general the tubes of the internet, not the people on it, but
No,
yeah. But yes, yeah, you'll if you subscribe today, you'll get a fresh new edition on Thursday.
okay, good. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I saw we had Hamilton Tenants in Unity. Yeah, thank you for always tuning in. We had Mark from yeah, we had Mark Anderson always
Oh,
tunes
good,
in.
yeah, good, yeah.
Uh Proud Army brother, thanks for tuning in. They said, hey, they know you. They were like, Chris, how are you doing? So, you got some people that know you. And then we had Wanda Acevedo. Hi. That was all they said, but we had some folks tune in. So there you go.
Great.
All right. Okay, everyone. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Check out our Instagram. We'll be doing some new episodes with some folks in the community. So please follow us, Kojo's Corner Ham on Instagram and on YouTube. The other place, we just, it's become a thing. So YouTube, Instagram, and you'll get all the info. See you all. Thank